Hey, what's going on everyone? On today's video, I'll be taking a look at how we can really focus on burning the fat and fueling the muscle through nutrition. Now, here I have a pretty accurate model of a pound of body fat and a pound of muscle. And I want to start off by saying you can't turn this into this, mainly because they're just different types of tissues and they have very different jobs within the body. Now, I've got a pound of body fat here, but what if you got more fat that you want to lose? Like 10 pounds of body fat. And this is 10 pounds. So we'll keep that there. Before we get into all of the details on the board, I want to kind of break this down with an example. Here I've got a scale and it's pretty balanced at the moment. And we can look at this as calories in versus calories out. And the body likes to be at an equilibrium. It likes a balance of energy in matched with energy out. That's how we're able to maintain our body composition and our body fat levels throughout the year. Now, when we get fluctuations, it's usually because we're putting less energy out and more energy in, causing the body to store that excess energy in the form of body fat. Let me give you another example. We've got a muscle cell, and we'll call this a fat cell. We've got our macronutrients, which are essentially building blocks for the body: protein, fats, and carbs. Each one having, in the case of protein, amino acids, essential fatty acids for the fat, and glucose for the carbs, all of which are important and needed by the body. What's interesting is, if we look at a muscle cell, for example, a muscle cell only has limited capacity for storage. So the food that we eat and the exercise that we do, which increases the need for muscle energy replenishment, we can only pack in so much before it starts to spill out. And when it spills out, meaning we've got too much fuel stored in the body fat will be where it goes. And if we look at body fat in the sense of a balloon, it can continue to increase. Hence why we can continue to keep increasing our fat stores, whereas muscle stores, we have a limited capacity for that. Okay, so let's get into the details of understanding and being able to figure out how many calories and what that looks like in terms of how much protein, carbs, and fat you should ideally be eating to really fuel the muscle and burn the fat. And it's not just about dropping calories. Let's get into it. Behind me here, you can see a chart that I'm sure many of you are familiar with. Typical sort of government guidelines in terms of how many calories we should be aiming for. About 2,500 for men and about 2,000 for women. And you can see here on our sort of macronutrient chart, out of those calories, how much of those calories come from protein, carbs, and fat. And you've also probably seen the food pyramid, the healthy food pyramid, which shows the types of foods that we should be eating and getting less and less to the top. Now, this might be a personal opinion, but what's interesting here, lots of manufactured processed grains here. I wonder why. As we move up, okay, vegetables, great. Some cheese and milk, okay. Meats, proteins, and finally, fats, oils, and confectionery, sweets. Now, what I've got behind me is a slightly different approach based on all of the years of the competition, physique modeling that I've done, where I've needed to stay in great shape year-round, low levels of body fat, and keep my muscles full. This is both from an athletic and a health purpose as well. And I'll get into that in just a little bit. Let's move this because I don't agree with this, and I'm going to break down why. Now, before we get onto this, let's start by looking at establishing our BMR, our basal metabolic rate. Now, what I mean by that is the amount of calories that our body needs on a daily basis just for optimal functioning, regardless of exercise. Basically, if you were to stay in bed all day, your body needs a certain amount of calories just to function. So we're going to establish that. And the way I find works best is to simplify it. Start from 11 to 20 calories per pound of body weight. Now, let me explain. This takes into the equation of our body's essential needs and also our activity needs. And I'm basing this for myself, 15, so somewhere in the middle, times my weight, 175 pounds, gives me just over 2,600 calories a day, which, when we look at the guidelines here, 2,500, it's not a huge amount. And this is including my activity levels and to maintain the muscle mass that I've got. Drug-free. Now, if you're carrying a little bit extra body fat, 10, 20, or 50 pounds more body fat that you want to lose, I'd recommend starting on the lower end of the scale, 11, 12 calories per pound of body weight. Also, if you want to put on more muscle and you feel you're already pretty slim and lean, slightly higher, 16, 17, 18 calories per pound. But this is a good starting base rate. So I've always established a sort of maintenance phase and then adjust accordingly based on if I'm losing or adding weight for what I want. So 2,600 calories, this is what I'm at a day. And I've got an example here. Each of these beads represent 1 calorie. So those are my protein calories. These are my carbohydrate calories. And these are my fat calories. And together, they add up to 2,600 calories. Now, not all calories are the same. Let's get into that. Protein and carbs both share 4 calories per gram, whereas fat has 9 calories per gram. And fat, when you think about it in terms of oils or nuts, is much more condensed than animal proteins or potatoes, rice that make up much of the carbs. So fat is much easier to overconsume and it takes up much less space in the gut. It also yields twice as much energy. So whilst you might be thinking, well, I probably shouldn't eat too much fat because that's how I get fat. Not quite. The culprit is often from carbs. Too much of them, processed, man-made, manufactured, and simple carbs, all get broken down into sugar, which often then gets stored as body fat if they're not used by muscles. Again, I'll get onto that in just a second. This is my macronutrient split. The same amount of protein and carbs and fat makes up 1/5, 20%. And you can see here the calorie amount and the actual grams. So 262 grams of protein, the same for carbs, and 58 grams of fat. Now, before you start thinking, that's too much protein, isn't it? Let's take a look. If I was to cut my protein back, let's say 20 or 30%, I'm still needing to make up my daily calorie intake from extra carbs and extra fat. And if I'm having extra carbs, sugar, or more fats, again, that smaller, more condensed calorie that yields twice as much energy, I'm essentially setting myself up to store more energy as fat. Protein, the essential building blocks of our bodies, doesn't just get used for building muscle. There's far more functions for protein as opposed to the sugars get broken down and potentially stored as fat. So this is not a high amount in relation to the actual calorie intake. Let's look at nutrient timing because how we spread our calories throughout the day is also important. And look, I know there's different approaches to eating. There's many different diets. We've got keto diets, we've got intermittent fasting, all of which have their benefits. This is a far more simplified approach to, I guess, bodybuilding, but we're gonna dilute it to make it applicable for every person. And that is really just understanding what you're eating, when you're eating, and how much of it you're eating. So to make this really simple, I've broken this down into 6 meals. And again, I'm not expecting everyone to go, okay, let me start eating 6 meals a day. This is just an example of how I would structure out my competitive eating. And it's really simple to then condense this into 3 meals and 2 snacks or 4 meals throughout the day. The principles are the same. All I've done is evenly distributed my protein, carbs, and fat across each meal, spaced out about 3 hours. Again, if your timing between meals is 2 hours, 4 or 5 hours, that's gonna be a personal preference. But in terms of the structure, you can see I've simply divided all of my macronutrients equally into my meals. Now, the only other thing I would say is depending on when you might be working out, also how you work throughout the day, if you work night shifts or you work in the early morning, This is all gonna have to be slightly shifted to fit your requirements. But that's easy to do. Take more carbs from here and put them there. Take out some of the fat if you want, put it over here. Put fat into 2 of those meals and don't have any at night. Tons of different ways that you can structure this to really meet your needs. But in terms of the nutrient timing, this is a surefire way to be fueling the muscles, giving your body just enough of the right nutrition at the right time for the body to put it to use in terms of its optimal functioning and activity. And even though you might think that's a lot of carbs, a lot of fat, you got to remember, we're not overfeeding the body here. And this is for my build with a decent amount of muscle. I could essentially eat a lot of these meals at the same time and still not get fat. Remember, it still comes down to calories in versus calories out. Now, when it comes to fat loss, I've got a great video explaining the essentials of how the body uses energy for fat. And that really comes down to manipulating slightly your carbohydrate intake and also adding cardio in. Again, I'd rather use cardio to use fat for fuel rather than restrict all of my calories to try and force my body to then use fat as fuel. It never works that way. The body will adjust and lower its metabolic rate, meaning it becomes more efficient on less calories. So if you're trying to lose body fat and you think just restricting or lowering your overall calorie intake is going to be the thing that works, you've got to understand one thing. Your body is going to lower its metabolic rate to be more efficient with less calories. So keep eating enough food to fuel the muscle and add cardio in to burn the fat. The only other thing I'd suggest is once you've established a solid baseline, follow it for 3 to 4 weeks. You basically want to get the body used to a set amount of nutrition at certain times throughout the day with the same types of food. And I'll include more information in this video description, including a full breakdown of protein-rich foods, complex carbohydrates, and healthy essential fats. By following more or less this structure, making it work for you based on your time schedule, the next step would be to then adjust the amount of carbohydrates. So we might drop our carbs from 40 down to 35, down to 30 every couple of weeks. And what we're doing is taking a little bit of the carbohydrates away, maybe not even adding any extra calories in, although if you do, they would come in the form of extra protein and extra fats. And let's not forget fiber. It's about 25 to 30 grams of fibrous, healthy greens. Again, a full list of fiber-based foods in the video description, and plenty of water. For me, this is about 2 liters of water throughout the day. But by slowly reducing our carbohydrates, we're gonna continue to coax the body to tap into our stored body fat for extra fuel. Now, the body uses fat at a much lower rest rate. So just throughout the day, your body's gonna be tapping into fat stores and using this energy, locked up energy, to fuel itself and also for cardio. When we talk about weight training, that's where the carbohydrates really come in. So if you're weight training towards the end of the day, you might want to group more of your carbohydrates closer towards that post-workout or workout time and limit them more so in the morning when you might be doing cardio to focus on fat burning. That's it. Lots of information, I understand. All of this comes from my book. This is called Ultra Lean. It's about 19 chapters covering everything that I've covered here, plus a lot more, and it relates back to when I was competing and really trying to understand how and why I should be eating to get the best results. Again, I understand that not everyone's going to be here from a competitive standpoint, but just the mindset and understanding how to eat, what to eat, and when to eat. And I'm going to leave you with this simple acronym to remember: FTP. Food, timing, and portion control. Practice those 3, and within just a few weeks, you will already have noticed a pretty big shift in how your body stores and uses energy. Okay, so on that note, be sure to check the video description below. Lots more information relating to everything we see on the board and more information about my book, plus a free guide on how to burn the fat and fuel the muscle. And finally, if you have any comments relating to this video or nutrition in general, drop them in the comments. I'll do my best to answer them all, and I'll catch you back here on the next video. Take care.